The Gunsmith in Delta Force is probably one of the more complex systems in the game, especially if you're just starting out. It can get very confusing quickly, and you can completely ruin how a weapon performs if you aren't paying attention to all the different stats in the game, calibrating it properly, and it can just feel really bad to fire weapons if you're not modifying them appropriately. So in today's video, I'm going to do an in-depth guide on the Gunsmith, talk about all the stats, the weapon attachments, and the calibration, making you hopefully an expert in weapon modification. So starting off with the stats, there are 6 major stats that I would say in Delta Force. So you have damage and range, which are both pretty self-explanatory, and then you have 4 that really affect how the weapon performs in the game. So you have control, so that'll affect your overall weapon recoil. Handling will affect the maneuverability of the weapon. Stability affects the overall stability of the weapon. Now I know this sounds dumb, but we're going to touch on this a little bit more. And accuracy, now you might think that this actually affects where bullets go when you're firing, but it actually only affects hip fire or point fire. So delving in a little bit deeper here, control, handling, stability, and accuracy all have their set of sub-attributes, which we're going to go into right now. So the sub-attributes for control are the full auto vertical recoil multiplier, full auto horizontal recoil multiplier, so both of these are separate. And then you also have different recoil multipliers for both vertical and horizontal fire, for single and burst, and finally the current firing stability. For handling, now this has quite a few sub-attributes. You have current ADS speed, sprint to fire delay, ADS movement speed. You also have walk speed and sprint speed in here, but actually increasing or decreasing the handling doesn't affect the stats. It's completely based off of the weapon itself. You also have reload time, empty reload time, holster time, and weapon switch time. For stability, the sub-attributes are breath, sway, range. So when you're holding your breath, it will dictate how much your aim is swaying. Breath holding duration, how long you can hold your breath. Recoil reduction when holding breath, which is really powerful. Hit flinch multiplier, because if you don't know, in Delta Force there is aim punch. So when you're firing at somebody, if they fire back at you, your aim is going to go all over the place. If you have too little stability, it's just going to make it very difficult to fire back at people. And then you have movement stability and lens stability while firing. And finally, accuracy, as I said, this only affects hip fire or point fire. So you have hip fire spread while standing and the maximum firing spread while standing. So it's just going to dictate how much of a spread your bullets will have if you're not actually ADSing. So a pretty easy one to understand for the accuracy. Now, when you're looking at a weapon's details, there's actually a lot of information here. You have the initial attributes, and when you start adding on modifications, you'll see the bar move, but you'll still be able to see where the weapon's original stats were. One of the most important parts of this details pane is actually the details button in the bottom, which will bring you to another screen where you can see a little bit more in depth what you're actually doing to the weapon when you're adding modifications to it. So if we click on here right now for the M4A1, you'll see that you have the damage. So it's telling you basically you're doing 20 damage up to 25 meters. You're doing maximum damage, and then it starts dropping off, and you can see how much it drops off based off of how far you are from the target. It's also showing you how much headshot damage you're doing. So it's just under 2x damage multiplier for the head, and then it's 20 for the rest of the body. But then if we click on control, you can actually see the recoil pattern of the M4A1 base. Okay, and then you have all of the sub-attributes for the control. And if we move to handling, you have handling and all of its sub-attributes and all the stats associated. Stability, same thing. You have all the sub-attributes, and then you have a little pictogram here. Breath sway range, breath held sway range. So as you can see, the green circle is very small here. So when you're actually holding your breath, your weapon won't be swaying much when you're ADSing. And then when you run out of breath, the uneven breath sway range, you can see it's magnified. Your weapon is swaying a lot more when you end up running out of breath. So stability is probably one of the more underrated stats in the game, but we're going to touch on that a little bit more later. And then finally, accuracy, as I said, only affects hip fire and point fire. And you can see here walking spread. So when you're walking, this is your spread. When you're stationary, so when you're not moving and hip firing, this will be your spread. And then finally, for maximum spread, so when you're doing things like jumping around and shooting at the same time, that will be your maximum bullet spread when hip firing. Now, when you're looking at actual weapon modifications, it's really important to read what it does. So if we take, for example, 2 compensators that have the exact same stats, so the Sandstorm vertical compensator and the Bastion horizontal compensator, you can see they have both +9 control, -2 handling, blinding flash, handling, And then you have vertical firing camera stability, vertical firing stability, and vertical control, as opposed to the Bastion horizontal compensator, which has horizontal control, horizontal firing stability, and horizontal firing camera stability. So albeit they have the exact same stats, they don't affect the same sub-attributes, which is where the nuances of the Gunsmith and Delta Force start to kick in here, where you really need to know what you're doing and how you're modifying your weapon rather than just looking at how many points they're giving in the 4 major weapon stats. And then you have certain weapon attachments, for example, the silent suppressor, that'll affect something like fire rate. So as you can see here, negative fire rate by a lot. So the base fire rate for the M4A1 is 800. So as you can see, when you're putting silent suppressor on there, it's reducing the fire rate by 104 RPM. And then you have other weapon attachments like other suppressors that will increase the muzzle velocity. So you can see here, range and muzzle velocity is increased with the silent suppressor. So the base muzzle velocity for the M4A1 is 550. And then if we put the silent suppressor on here, you can see it is 616 meters per second. So you really got to pay attention when you're picking out attachments, what they're actually doing to the weapon. And then the suppressors obviously have weak gunshot suppression, and some have reduced minimap visibility when firing. So that's weak. And then you have the other suppressors that have strong minimap visibility reduction when firing, such as the silent suppressor, but it does come with its own set of downsides, as I just mentioned. Moving on to, for example, foregrips. So if we look at a few foregrips here, the RKO-0 foregrip, you can see this increases the vertical firing camera stability. So this, basically think about it, when you're firing, your lens is just going to bounce a lot less vertically. If we look at something like the K1 Elite Bevel foregrip, it's the other side. It's horizontal firing camera stability. So when you're firing your weapon in full auto, the lens, your actual optic, is just going to jump less from left to right. So you can combine stuff by putting, for example, a K1 Elite Bevel foregrip on your weapon. And so that's reducing your horizontal camera stability. And then if we go put the Sandstorm vertical compensator on here, this is increasing your vertical firing camera stability. So your lens is going to jump less, both vertically and horizontally. And this can be a huge game changer when you're actually firing at targets, to have your optic jump around a lot less. Now, how I like to approach weapon building in Delta Force is first figuring out, okay, what am I actually doing with this weapon? How does this weapon perform in the game? What is it actually good for? So you have some weapons that are obviously very good at CQB combat, so you're going to probably modify different stats, as opposed to, for example, a marksman rifle that you're going to modify different stats from an SMG, which is really good in CQB, as opposed to the marksman rifle, which is a lot better at longer range engagements. So you're really going to be putting different stats on different weapons. So you got to figure out how you're going to use the weapon to start off with. Now, obviously you can make some pretty wacky builds in Delta Force. You can have an LMG that's just insane at hip fire. It's just not that common. People don't think about modifying their weapons like that, but technically you can. So however you want to start off with your weapon, think about it, then say, okay, this is how I'm building it. So if we take the M4A1, for example, I look at the damage model, it's doing 20 damage up to 25 meters. Pretty decent. You're doing almost 2x headshot damage multiplier if you look at the damage curve here. So overall, a pretty decent AR. Now, the next step is looking a little bit at the controls. So obviously for fully automatic weapons, you're probably going to want to mitigate a lot of that recoil. As you can see here, the recoil pattern we have, it's going slightly to the right, then slightly to the left, and it goes back into the right. So you have some of that nasty horizontal recoil, which is the more difficult recoil to control overall, like for the most part. Some people are really, really good at controlling horizontal recoil, but that's what you're mostly going to want to mitigate for fully automatic weapons. So let's start off by actually picking a barrel for the M4A1. So some weapons don't have different barrel options, some do. The M4A1 happens to have another barrel option. So for this one, you can see all the different barrels have different stats and modify different things, but some of them also give you extra slots. So if we look at the AR Trench Standard barrel, it's not giving us any extra slots. If we look at the AR Spec Ops Integrally Suppressed, you can see that there's a conflicting slot here. The muzzle device will just simply go away because there's a built-in suppressor on this barrel. If we look at the AR Raid Short barrel, you can see you're going to lose your rail bipod and 3 patch slots. So you kind of got to be careful as to what barrel or what attachments you're changing, because you might lose some weapon attachment slots, which could make your weapon perform better in the long run, because then you can slap on more stats with all of those different attachments that you might be losing. So for this one, I would go for the AR Trench Standard barrel combo. It's increasing the range by 1, but also increasing the control by 5, and then it's also increasing the range and muzzle velocity. So it's a flat out bonus on the control. So when I'm putting on new attachments on a weapon, if they affect control, for the most part, I'll go into the details pane and then go to the control tab and see how it's affecting the recoil control on my weapon. So you can see here we went from 1x recoil multiplier to 0.9x. So this specific barrel is actually affecting both the same way. You're not getting more vertical recoil or less horizontal recoil. It's affecting it the same way. So that's great. We're going to go back here. So we're going to go ahead and install that. Next, the muzzle. So if I'm looking at the control, once again, you can see, as I said, a little bit of nasty horizontal recoil on here. Now, I like to correct that, which is why I use the Bastion horizontal compensator a lot. Some of the weapons, granted, have mostly vertical recoil, so then I'd opt for like the Sandstorm vertical compensator, but for this specific weapon, I would go with the Bastion horizontal compensator. So you see you're getting +9 control at the slight cost of handling, but for the most part, handling, you know, it's nice to have really fast ADS speed, but if you're ADSing really quickly, but you can't control your weapon, then it's kind of a moot point. But we can probably make up for that, and there's certain points at which you start getting diminishing returns on actually increasing stats or lowering them, so you also have to pay attention to that. So as I said, +9 control on this one. If we look at the details here, you can see the before equipping, kind of nasty horizontal, but then if we look after equipping, you can see it's getting a little bit more straight, and the current full auto horizontal recoil multiplier is now at 0.76x. So we're going to go ahead and install the horizontal compensator. Now for the foregrip, I do want to control a little bit of that vertical recoil as well, so I would put maybe the resonant ergonomic grip on here. So obviously this is not like a perfect weapon build, I'm just giving you guys an example. So you're getting +7 control, slight penalty on handling, but it's also increasing your vertical firing camera stability, as did the Bastion horizontal compensator for the horizontal camera firing stability. So if we look at the details here, go control, you can see it's getting a little bit shorter in terms of recoil, right? So it used to be a lot higher at vertical recoil, and now it's getting a little bit shorter. So overall, maybe a little bit easier to control. Again, probably not the best example here that I'm giving, but still, you're getting the gist of it. Then if we go to magazines, a lot of the magazines have a lot of downsides. As you can see, this one has a ton of penalties, and most extended mags do. So you kind of got to pick and choose which ones you're going to use. And again, this is highly dependent on how you're going to actually use the weapon. For me, 30 rounds on an M4 is not enough, but 60 is maybe a little bit too much. I have the tendency to reload a lot, so it's also going to depend on how you actually play the game. 45 seems like a good middle ground here, where you're losing some stats but not getting super big penalties on like 2-3 stats, like with the 60 round drum mag or the 60 round extended mag, where you're losing out a lot of control and a lot of handling. So I would put the 45 round extended mag on here, which you're losing the most accuracy, but accuracy at the end of the day, if you're not planning on hip firing all that much, it's not too big of a deal. So install that. The mag assist, I would suggest putting this on every single weapon. You get absolutely no penalties, it's only positives, right? So just slap that on. And then you keep going through all of the different weapon attachments and looking at how they actually affect your weapon. You have certain weapons that offer stock kits. So a stock kit will completely replace the rear pistol grip and the stock for just one chunk, right? So as you can see here, if I equip this Resonant 2 integral stock, you're getting positive stats and, you know, a slight loss in stability here, but you can see you don't have a rear grip slot anymore. So if I were to equip a rear grip slot, you can see that it'll remove the stock kit. So some weapons have specifics like this, where you have one attachment that'll replace like 2 other attachments, so just be aware of that. And then the last attachment that I want to touch on before we move on to something else, the laser sights. So you have a few laser sights that you can choose from. Same thing with the flashlights. So when you're equipping a laser sight, be aware it does affect handling, and obviously it's going to be visible to enemies. So when the laser light combo is off, it reduces the handling, but when it's on, specifically, it increases handling, increases accuracy, and also allows a tactical holding stance, which is the quickest way to technically ADS. I call it ADS even though you're not really ADSing. You're like bringing your weapon up to your face and you're using your laser to actually like aim, as opposed to using a red dot, but it is like the quickest way to ADS. So if you have a magnified optic that's taking a long time to ADS, you might want to have something like this on your weapon for when you're getting in CQB engagements where you really want to ADS quickly, but not necessarily hip fire. So it's up to you if you wanted to put it on your weapon or not. So bringing in my M4A1 build that I made a video for a while back, you can see the details here. So you can see the initial attributes where they were and where I modified them to. So when I'm using a fully automatic weapon, for the most part, I'm putting quite a few points in control because you want it to be easier to control the recoil. Also putting some points in stability because you don't want to get your aim punch through the roof every time you're getting shot at. You want to be able to fire back at the enemies, you know, consistently and accurately. And then for the handling, for this one, I was like, you know, it's not too big of a deal. I'm using this weapon mostly in medium range engagements. And then accuracy is exactly the same as it was in the base M4. So not terrible, but not great either. It'll do the job in a pickle. If you're close enough to the target, you know, hip fire, you'll probably be able to down them without too much of a hassle. Now, looking at the details of this weapon, if we look at the control, you can see it's almost a straight line. So for this specific weapon, I put a Bastion horizontal compensator and a secret order bevel foregrip to really mitigate that horizontal recoil, which I just don't like to deal with. And you'll see this weapon just handles like a dream. It is just laser accurate when you're pulling down on your mouse or your joystick, whatever you're playing on. And then obviously not forgetting about stability. The current lens firing stability is through the roof. So as opposed to the 1x, it's now 0.56x, which makes it so easy to keep your actual optic on target. So if we step into the firing range here with the M4A1, you'll see I won't control the recoil at all to start off with. So we're just going to aim at this dummy over here and just let it go. So you can see still a slight bend here to the right and to the left, but it's pretty negligible. And if we're actually controlling the recoil here, now I'm controlling it a little bit shitty. I'm using a vertical mouse as opposed to my regular gaming mouse, but this thing is overall like considered a no recoil weapon, albeit no weapons can truly beat no recoil in Delta Force, but very, very easy to manage. Now what I want to show you guys next is actually the lens firing stability. So if we swap out, for example, the foregrip and the muzzle device for something else, let's just put something that has similar stats to it. Let's just go with the practical vertical foregrip. So it's similar enough where you're losing 3 control and gaining 1 handling. Not too crazy, not exactly the same, but it'll do the trick for this example. And then if we look for a different muzzle device, let's go with the titanium contest muzzle brake. Okay, now we're going to take this, equip this, go back into the firing range, and I'll show you both weapons firing simultaneously side by side, one with camera firing stability bonus and one without. So as you saw there on the right side, the lens was jumping around a lot less, making it easier to keep your reticle on target, and on the left it was jumping around quite a bit more. Now it might not be super visible, but when you're actually playing the game, you'll probably notice a lot better how it affects the weapon when you're firing the weapon yourself. Now the next thing we have to talk about is the calibration. So a lot of the weapon attachments in Delta Force offer calibration, so you can modify it to boost certain stats and then reduce other stats. So you can simply click on a specific attachments, for example the barrel here, and go calibrate, or you can simply go calibrate on the tab up here, click calibrate, and then you can pick the different attachments that offer calibration and calibrate them that way. So if we click on the barrel here, you can see I have plus 50 grams and plus 10 millimeters in length for the barrel. And how this modifies the weapon, you're getting increased muzzle velocity, but you're also getting increased firing stability at the cost of ADS speed and ADS movement speed. So calibration is a vital part of modifying a weapon appropriately in Delta Force, and probably a lot of people don't use it well, or they don't use it at all. And yeah, it just makes for weapons that might underperform slightly. But you have to be careful because it is very easy to ruin your weapon build by calibrating it the wrong way. So if we go through all of these different attachments here, foregrip, you can see you have the weight limit here, so this increases your control at the cost of ADS speed, and then the thickness increases stability when moving. So when you're actually moving while ADSing and firing, the weapon is just going to be more stable if you add stability when moving to it, but it does cost ADS movement speed. So it really depends again on how you're going to play that specific weapon build. For the rear grip, plus 50 grams gives you plus 6% extra control at the slight cost of aiming stability while breathing. And then for the thickness on this specific grip here, if I go plus 20 millimeters, you have a hipfire aim speed, but you get plus 16% stability when moving. Apparently, hipfire aim speed is bugged, and if you change it positive or negative, it's going to affect your ADS speed. Can't attest to that. I haven't really tested it out that much, but yeah, just keep that in mind for the stock. If we look at this, so you have weight limit and thickness. Some weapon stocks don't have the exact same calibration, same thing for pistol grips and all the different attachments, but you can see here plus 6% control, plus 4 firing stability, and then it affects the hip fire aim speed and the aiming stability while breathing. You also have things like cheek pads that can have calibration, so I bumped both of these up to get more control and more firing stability on this weapon. And then finally the optic. So this one is a little bit different. So first, look at the eye relief, okay? Basically what the eye relief does is if you bring it down by -20, it's going to bring the sight closer to your pupil, which means that you have more available real estate within the sight housing. You're going to see more stuff within the optic itself. If you push it out and make it further away from your pupil, then the sight will technically be smaller because it's further away from your eyes, so there'll just be less things that you'll be able to see within the sight itself. I always like to put it at -20 just to have the sight closer so I can see more within the optic. Some people say that bringing it further away, so boosting it by plus 20 millimeters, will reduce the perceptible recoil of the weapon. I found it was pretty negligible, and I just prefer having a better sight picture with the optic closer to my face. And then for the zoom, if you bring it down, it'll bring the zoom of your optic down by the specified amount, and oppositely, if you bring it up, it'll increase the zoom of your optic by the specified amount, and this can vary depending on how magnified your optic is to begin with. And then when you're done calibrating the weapon, in the calibration screen, you can actually show the calibration effects all totaled up together. So if we look at what I did for the M4A1 here, you can see I have a total of plus 9% muzzle velocity, plus 12% firing stability, plus 22% extra control, negative 17% ADS speed, negative 4% ADS movement speed, negative 54% aiming stability while breathing, and negative 2 pupillary distance. So going back into the actual details pane here, if we look here, go details, you'll be able to see how the weapon, the end stats end up being. So you can see all the different sub attributes here and how they've been modified. Handling, same thing. So you can see here I have a nearly 410 millisecond current ADS speed as opposed to the base one, which was 302, but I can live with that. ADS speed for me, depending on the weapon I'm using, is not a priority stat. For the most part, when I'm using ARs at longer ranges, I'll probably try and increase the control and stability as much as I can without costing too much of the other stats. Accuracy could mostly care less about for ARs, albeit sometimes I try to keep it a little bit balanced, but handling will probably be the third stat I prioritize. Then if I'm using something like an SMG and CQB, I'm probably going to mostly prioritize the accuracy, the handling, then maybe the stability, but then you can also make SMGs that are really good at range too. So it all comes down to how are you going to use the weapon. You should prioritize the stats differently when you're actually modifying it. And before I forget, when you are actually pleased or you want to test out the weapon in maybe a live game and have multiple different tests ready, you can actually save the loadout and then just equip it right mid-game. So in all the tabs here, if you go loadout and then you go save, you can save that specific loadout to one of the 5 slots that are available, and then gives you the opportunity to test different loadouts that you've built in game. And then this is also where you would import a weapon code. So if you go import here, you can actually import a loadout or share your own by clicking share and then copying the weapon share code and then sending it to somebody. And you also have a few extra things here with the designer picks or sometimes streamer recommended. You can see what streamers or designers have suggested for this specific weapon. And last little tidbit of information for the gunsmith: certain weapons come with attachment loadouts. So the weapon skin itself, even if you haven't unlocked the attachment yet, might come with something that you don't have. So if we go apply appearances attachment loadout for this one, you can see it came with the integrally suppressed barrel maybe, or that's the AR trench long barrel, and then a suppressor. So even though you might not have that unlocked yet, you can still use it if you apply the appearances attachment loadout. So the weapon share code for the M4A1 that I was shooting in this video will be available in the description down below, as well as the G sheets to all of the different weapon builds I've made for Delta Force up to now. If you have any questions about the gunsmith, please leave them in the comment section down below. I know I've been going on for a while, but there's just a lot of information to cover here. I hope I covered most of it appropriately, and I hope that you understood what all of the different weapon stats mean, all of the different sub attributes that you can change, and then the calibration is just a lot to take in. I know it's a lot of information, but hopefully this video brought you a little bit of knowledge in that regard. And if it did, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and as always, thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good one.